Good. Well, thank you very much, Robert, for that life history that you've presented. I hope that I'm going to say some words, but I hope that you'll feel free to ask about anything from the blue lights that Robert loves to look up and see, through to my experience as a Minister of Transport. I can tell you one thing about the Ministry of Transport, and that is when I was chairing meetings and people were late for my meetings, I had to apologise. I can tell you a second thing about going from the Department of Health to the Department of Transport. And one of my responsibilities was, of course, to try and reduce road accidents and deaths on the roads. And I don't claim unique responsibility for this, but as it happens, our figures were coming steadily down. And I thought, when I was talking to my past colleagues in the Department of Health, they would be quite pleased with me for this. But I got some very glum looks, and they said, now what do you think we're going to do for organ transplants? So, just think about it, what's the policy progression there? I did offer to abolish speed limits and drink drive limitations, but on the whole, perhaps not. Well, the American actor George Jessel, who some of you may recall in the last century was also known as the Toastmaster General of the United States, he used to say that the human brain starts working the moment you are born and never stops until you stand up to speak in public. And so it's with some trepidation that I, as a politician, risk exposing my brain to this distinguished EHMA audience. I tell you, when a young female colleague in the European Parliament came up to me one day and put her hand in mine, I thought it was my lucky day. But when she went on to ask me if I thought her doctor was right about her damaged finger not being broken, I realised that there are unexpected consequences of being a health spokesman. And I gently explained that I wasn't a doctor, but she insisted. I'd been a health minister, therefore I must know the answer. I must be able to advise her. So I held her hand a little longer than was strictly necessary, and assured her that personally I would accept her doctor's diagnosis. Well, in my UK Parliament days, I had the good fortune to be asked by my Prime Minister to be Minister for Health and Social Services, and I've often said that when I went there I thought I knew it all, and after a year I knew I didn't, and after 2 years I knew nobody else did either. And that's when I relaxed and started to enjoy the hunt for solutions to our health challenges, which is probably why my Prime Minister then moved me to transport. But I did enjoy and relish those challenges, and still do, and particularly, I suppose, the impossible quandaries that I had to wrestle with of mental health and neurological health problems, the challenges of longevity, and the heartaches of childcare and child abuse and child custody. But in both parliaments I was in, it was often assumed that to be a health spokesman, one must be a doctor. And I would say, as I said, I would say, no, I'm not a doctor. But, I remember one occasion somebody apologised and said, oh, I'm sorry, it's not Dr. Bowis. I'm sorry, it's Professor Bowis. And, I said, no, and they said, well, were you a nurse? And, no. Therapist? No. Health manager? No. Well, why were you a health minister? I said, well, I was a patient. And I still am. And that's my expertise and my qualification to be a health minister. Now, I'll come back to that, but the brain, as I started, is not a bad place to start as we look at the exciting prospects that there are for scientific advance and healthcare development, alongside the enormous challenges of access and affordability and priority setting. In 400 BC, Hippocrates was clear that, and I quote from nothing else, that the brain come joys, delights, laughter and sports, sorrows, grief, despondency, and lamentations. And over the subsequent centuries, the human brain has been and continues to be researched and understood. And I'm not a scientist, but I know and stand amazed before the wonder and complexity of these astounding human organs. I can't comprehend the billions of neurons and their connections that determine my thoughts, my imagination, my feelings, my actions, my speech, my behaviour, that enable me to function and sometimes prevent my functioning. And yet I understand some of those connections as you live your life and result, for example, in the sciatic pain that has been made me hobbling around for the past couple of months. And I know that we have many miles to travel, many millions to spend before we find answers for those neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and the physical damage to the brain that comes from stroke and head injury and chemical poisoning. So, from my dual diagnosis as patient and politician, I need to see how we should be meeting the challenges, not just of the brain, but of health in total, of a European population that will double the number of the over 80s by 2050, which already sees stroke as the leading cause of disability, which faces an explosion of mental disorders, and which has a sharply upward graph of numbers with neurodegenerative diseases, with all the implications in costly care and drugs and devastating burdens for family carers. My first prescription is, as I've already acknowledged, the need for investment in research. Research for future cures, but also into innovative improvements in care and management. Research too into how we better address co- and multi-morbidity, especially perhaps as between physical and mental health. My second is that we need to give a much higher priority to illness and disability prevention and health promotion. My third is that we should never make policy decisions without first listening to and involving those who will be affected, and that those voices should contribute to service planning. My fourth is to go with the current grain of the European semester some of us were talking about earlier today, where human health is acknowledged, or should be, as a prerequisite to economic health and wealth. And already, as we've heard, there's a significant number of member states in the European Union identifying steps that they intend to take in this direction, and we have to monitor those to make sure that they are meaningful. It's bewildering, perhaps, that we have recognised the connection between health and wealth where low-income countries are concerned, with my work in the past with development policies. But we've failed to look behind us in our own backyard and make the connection there. That's what we have to change, and that's hopefully what the semester process will help with. But let me put these issues, or some of them, in human terms. I was calling around my London constituency a few years ago when I met an elderly lady sitting watching television with the sound off. And I asked her why, and she said she was rather deaf and couldn't hear the sound. So I said, could I ask somebody to come and see if we could get a better hearing aid? And she said, oh no, that wasn't the problem. A very nice lady had called and enabled her to have a new hearing aid, but the problem was she also had arthritis in her fingers and she couldn't manipulate the control. And so one person with two disability problems, and neither resolved because the two agencies concerned didn't talk to each other. Another day, another constituent, he was living in a very nice, modern, sheltered flat, apartment, but he was deeply depressed. And he had previously lived in a very poor housing, in a rundown estate, but he said he'd been happy there. And I said, in what way? And he said, well, he knew people, he knew the neighbourhood, and every every Saturday night he played the piano in his local pub and had a sing-song. And now he had been moved by well-meaning housing officers to a lovely flat, but where the rules did not allow him to play music. And so he sat there, his fingers growing stiff and his life made miserable. And the third day, as minister visiting a mental health hospital, "Can I have a word with you?" a day patient meeting me on the stairs asked. And the staff, perhaps managers, tried to hustle him away, saying, "No, the minister's very busy, they'd like to write, see if they would make sure I got the message." And I said, "No, hang on, let me hear, let's hear what he wants to say." And he said, "Well, you know, Minister, I know when I'm going to be ill. But if I go to my doctor and tell him, he says, no, you're not ill enough yet. I can't refer you to the specialist services. So I go away and I become really ill. And then that's bad for me. And it's bad for the hospital staff who then have to treat me. And it costs more and it takes longer for me to get back to anything like normality." 3 examples from my own experience of services not listening to service users and not talking to each other. And too often we fail sufficiently to provide the seamless care that a person with health or disability problems needs. And that applies within health, it applies between health and social care, and it applies beyond these to other service providers. And so we need new and imaginative and cooperative partnerships and budget sharing when appropriate to prevent illness and to avoid relapse. Housing people, for example, not in the isolation of high-rise flats on rundown estates, but in communities where the living environment will be part of the support and stability that a person needs. And rehabilitation and training so that he or she can regain self-confidence and self-respect, and in so doing make readmission less likely or at least less frequent. So our team for the future should be scientists and health professionals and social workers and housing officers and benefit managers and trainers and employers and advocates and service users and families and NGOs and planners and architects and teachers, a one-stop shop of care and support. And yes, we need a new partnership with better focused politicians. Politicians need to listen and to hear and to understand and to act, but too often their hearing is dominated by big media and public opinion issues of floods, wars, currencies, crime, and health can be squeezed out unless or until there's a crisis. And we have, of course, a crisis. Steadily unaffordable aging, worsening rates of neurodegenerative diseases, escalating epidemics of stroke and diabetes and heart disease and depression, not to mention the 30 million of us who live with a rare disease, individually small clusters, but collectively an enormous family of health challenge. And of course we have drugs and therapies that we can't afford to prescribe. But these are not the stuff of media headlines, or if they are, they last a few days, and then only if those directly affected carry that knowledge forward as society finds something else to worry about. Yet it's now that we need the action buttons for policy and spending priorities. Tomorrow the problem will be so much worse, and of course tomorrow is someone else's problem. Politicians, civil servants, managers, clinicians, we all move on and watch our successors but 3 try to cope with the problems that we failed to prevent. Yet policies for healthy aging and disability prevention can work. So can physical and mental health at work policies, improving stress management, providing a health-enhancing working environment, enabling the employee who is a carer to be effective at both through flexible working hours. And so we need that investment in research, we need that listening to patients, we need the understanding of the forecasts of what the cost of inaction and non-investment will be. And then we need to harness the energies and experience of patients. And the truth is that we shan't be able to afford the cost of illness unless we recruit citizens to be partners in the campaign to prevent disease and disability and to promote good physical and mental health. And the second truth, of course, is that in the age of the internet, patients increasingly understand their condition and the options available, and are willing to share responsibility, not have total responsibility, but to share it for their treatment and care. And the key to this second truth will be the quality, the reliability, the objectivity of the information that they receive and the people giving it. As we open the doors to personalised medicine, healthcare, genomic and biomarker research, DNA testing, producing more accurately targeted and perhaps less wastefully prescribed drugs and treatments, then we'll have a heightened need for patients to be involved, but a challenging task in educating them to the new realities of who will benefit and be eligible for what. And it's not just about respect for the individual patient I'm talking about. It's not just about compliance, important as both those are. It's about recognising that patients are experts who need to understand the changes in practice and policy so that they can be real partners in it. Because we alone know what it's like to live with a disease and side effects. I know my diabetes, I know my triple bypass, I know my sciatica, I know my lymphedema. I know the signs, I know the side effects of the medicines. I don't know why, but I do know what. We may not know or understand the causes of the chemistry of treatments or the psychology of patient reactions. Those come from education and training of scientists and health professionals. But we are experts in our own personal experience of disease, whether or not we are articulate in our expertise. And many of us are capable of being trained to the standard which can make us effective partners in our care. And it is about partnership, not of equals, but a bond between a professional and a patient. And that goes for prevention, treatment, lifestyle decisions, service planning, clinical trials, health technology assessment. It's about seeking, listening to, bringing together the expertise of living with illness, the expertise of treating and caring for someone with that illness, and the expertise of living with the drugs, therapies and care regime that results. It can't be just over to you. It must be supported by education, training, monitoring. We need education as to the nature of the illness and side effects. We need to know who to go for reassurance, advice, help. It means monitoring, non-intrusive of how we are coping. It means understanding that some medicines will not be for all of us, maybe not for me. We'll have to new evaluation of the current cries about postcode lotteries. But just as school education leads to literacy and numeracy, so health education and training can lead to health literacy and numeracy, and indeed health technology competence and competence. And I know when I introduced the legislation in the United Kingdom to bring in direct payments to people with disabilities, the response initially was shock horror. How could such people possibly cope? But to me, the important question was how to give the person more independence and dignity and freedom to choose the services to match his or her assessed need. And after that came the question of how do we enable people to cope with the freedom to purchase one's own services and to account for them, rather than having to accept what the local authority provided. It wasn't a universal panacea, it's not for everybody, but for some, perhaps for many. It gave them a new responsibility and an enhanced quality of life. Living with or through one's own illness can be an invaluable part in helping, play a valuable part in helping professionals to take decisions about our condition. And in the same way, a close family member will build up a powerful experience through the carer role. But beyond the immediate experience is a knowledge in both individual and carer that has wider value. And that's why, as Health Minister, I put strong emphasis on piloting both the involvement of patients in service planning and in the establishment of a users and carers advisory group that met with me directly and regularly and with an agenda set by them. And similarly, my last parliamentary report in the European Parliament, in force, in theory at least, since last October, is the new rights for patients in cross-border healthcare. And that will give patients eventually more power to bypass sluggish services, but they will need reliable advice and information if they are to benefit. And in time, patients and their medical advisors will have much more discretion to make a reality of a patient needs-led service and a patient choice one. In future, I believe, or eventually in future, that's not bad English, money really will follow patients, as the rhetoric has often claimed in the past. But the question will grow as to how we balance equal access for all, with equal opportunity for each to find faster and more personalised treatment. It will certainly be a challenging time for health service budget managers. But the future is exciting in so many ways. New drugs, new therapies, new operations, new regimes of care. Who knows what cures and life-enhancing treatments are a few short years away. And over the years I've seen environmental aids making the impossible becoming possible. Seeing severely disabled people communicating, indicating their wishes and preferences, drawing their curtains, safely pouring a hot drink. I've seen social services monitoring a frail elderly person in her own home, unobtrusively and from a distance, to ensure that person is moving normally and that swift support can be provided in the event of a fall. Medical devices are coming on stream to check with a scanner rather than a finger prick a person's blood sugar and feed the information down the line to the doctor who will be alerted to any abnormalities. There are still challenges to patient and staff safety, from needle stick injuries, HAIs, medical accidents, counterfeit drugs and devices, but awareness and training and other measures are beginning to diminish such risks. Research and personalised healthcare, self-management, all of course bring risks, but my fellow patients will tell you, as I'm sure they do, that they support more risk-taking. Too many times in policy making in the UK and in the European Union, I was assured by the officials that we can't put patients at risk by not protecting them from X, Y, or Z. And then I go and ask the patients about this, and they tell me that if there is no risk, there's no scientific progress. If there's no progress, then my cure is a long way down the line. So please don't be over-risk conscious, but take sensible precautions, of course. I have been also told by them that the expression one should use is not risk-benefit. It's always benefit-risk. Put the benefit first, and then we'll calculate the risk. But that's perhaps semantic, but it's an important point that they make. But let me come back to what is perhaps our health service's greatest achievement, but becoming our greatest challenge, and that's longevity. I observed in recent decades the ageing process and progress of my mother, who died a few years ago at the age of 102. In her late 70s, her hearing deteriorated, which we dealt with by installing for her a fax machine so that she could communicate with us from her home 50 miles away. In her late 80s, her stairs became more difficult, and so we installed a stair lift. In her 90s, her eyesight faded, and we provided black felt pens and erasable writing boards so that we could communicate with her. In her late 90s, with her body increasingly frail but her mind intact, the problem was to stimulate the latter, despite her communication difficulties. And that was where the system broke down. By then she was in a nursing home, and I witnessed the way the staff of the nursing home were certainly not just well-intentioned, but they gave great loving care, but they didn't have the time to do what she needed, which was to stimulate her mind. It wasn't on the nursing or care agenda. Families don't have time very often to go and help with that, and so the interest shrinks, and all too often depression then sets in. And with more and more people living decades longer than their parents and grandparents, we must either say we've gone too far in enabling people to survive, or we must make that survival worthwhile. We need to look at the future needs of people who may be well well for longer, but then face quite a few years of frailty. We need to identify and plug the gaps in our traditional services and to enable people to enjoy quality of life in those later years. We need to help people to prepare for longevity through their lifestyle planning and practice. We need to use our imagination to suggest ways in which people can be useful and feel themselves valued in the years beyond retirement. We must encourage, educate and train people to take much greater control of their health and their illnesses and disabilities when these occur. I never want to have to ask the question, but what have I been kept alive for? Well, there are many challenges facing health leaders and policymakers, and perhaps only a politician can say to my fellow politicians, break the habit of a party political lifetime. I know the pressures. I've been there. I felt the urge to describe with Dr. Ponglos everything as being for the best and the best of all possible worlds. Or the reverse, if one's in opposition. We have to break that 4 or 5 year cycle of electoral promise and counter-promise. We have to look longer term. We must listen and learn and then say what we believe to be true, however inconvenient that truth may be. You may not guarantee future promotion. You may get frosty looks from your political or administrative bosses. But just remember the words of Robert Kennedy. For every 10 men who are willing to face the guns of an enemy, there's only one willing to brave the disapproval of his fellows, the censure of his colleagues, the wrath of his society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle. If we can manage these changes, we shall have something of value that the European Union and each of our countries will have contributed to the well-being of our citizens, alongside public health, environmental health, consumer safety, and extended patient rights. It means challenging restrictive practices in policymaking and sweeping away the interinstitutional and interdepartmental turf and budget wars. Stubbornness is too often the order of the day. Sometimes the frustrations make politicians think that it's all too much. But healthy people are fundamental to healthy economies. We have to find solutions. We don't enter politics for a quiet life. We shouldn't quit when solutions are hard to find. In our kit, or should be, the politician's mantra, those who make difficult choices in life often make lots of mistakes, but those who avoid difficult choices make the biggest mistake of all. So let me leave you with an Arabian proverb. He who has health has hope, and he who has hope has everything. Thank you.
I would think we sort of need a bit of time to just let this get in. It was a brilliant speech, I think. Brilliant. Fantastic. It gave hope, and still it was damn serious. That's great. Thank you. When listening to this like this, I become truly happy that I choose this way in life to work with healthcare. But also realize that when you start as a young professional, you have not a clue what this is all about. Not a clue. Then you start to meet patients, and it takes quite a while until you understand what it's all about. And it's all about life, of course. And probably it takes a bit of a lifetime to learn about life. You did a marvelous summary of that, and I think we should all have such a speech now and then ringing in our ears when we go to work, really, because that makes it worth all the struggle. Thank you again. So, well, open to questions, discussions, etc. We have a rare opportunity now with Mr. Bowis here, of course, to ask those specific questions about what can the European Union, etc., help us with in these respects. You have also the experience, you have addressed the British Parliament, and you have addressed the European Parliament, so I mean, you have first-hand experience of addressing people, either British or European, and are there differences, are there, what kind of interaction do you get, and what do you feel about it, etc. So, well, while you are thinking about things then to ask, is there a difference when you stood in front of your British Parliament or when you saw the European Parliament, when you were talking about things? I suppose you talked about things like this.
Well, there are certainly differences. When I was standing up in the British Parliament, I was either standing up as a backbencher and trying to get the answer I wanted out of the minister, or I was standing up as the minister, not knowing what question was going to come at me, and hoped that I'd been well enough briefed to be able to give a reasonably sane and sensible answer. That, of course, doesn't apply in the European Union. In the European Parliament, there are no ministers as such. Well, not quite true. They're not there as members of the Parliament. There is a question time, not very well attended, and only a handful of questions are asked and answered, and they're answered by a commissioner, who is not like a minister. He's got responsibility for the subject area, usually. Not always. Sometimes he's not available, so another commissioner comes along and answers with the group. So the only real to and fro you get from time to time is with the presidency of the council, who will send along their minister, and you can have a little bit of a argument. But I don't think that matters, let's put it that way. I think in both cases, the real progress of health policy was done in committee, not in the chamber. I spent a lot of time in committee, not just on health issues, but on a variety of issues in my time in this Parliament. And when I was a minister in the British Parliament, the health orchestras will come to that, I would always go along with, in my back pocket, some concessions that I was prepared to make. And I wanted to make some to my own side, to keep them happy and on side, and some to the opposition, to keep them involved in the political process, so that they felt there was a point in their being there. They couldn't win the votes, not normally, but they could at least achieve concessions for things that they persuaded me that it was right to do. And there was a reasonable to and fro in that sense. It's not what you get from the media coverage of our Parliament, probably other parliaments too, which appears more like a shouting match. But in reality, there is a lot of constructive work cross-party to find answers. In the European Parliament, the real work also is done in committees. And I, as the spokesman for what was and still is the largest group in the European Parliament, EPP, on health and on the environment, was able to steer quite a lot of policies to decide who would write reports, to put questions to the Commission and draft reports myself, as I did on a variety of issues, including cross-border health. And there you can really make a difference. And the interesting thing about the European Parliament is that one discipline and so on. As party groups didn't know what I was doing in the European Parliament, probably just as well most of the time, because I follow my nose, and if somebody had pulled me up, I suppose I'd have listened, but it meant I could go out on a limb on things, anything from air quality in London to the inadequacies of mental health policies across Europe. And so we took up things like the mobility of health professions when it looked as though they were going to be able to go and practice in another member state without any registration in that member state, etc., etc. So I think there were similarities in the process, but for an individual, whether spokesman or not, I think you've got more opportunity to do things in the European Parliament, and that is not understood by our publics back home.
Correct. Thank you. Yes. Aman?
Nobody else?
Yes. You started. I didn't get any or from. Do we have a microphone? We have. Yes. Thank you.
John, thank you very much indeed. It's inspiring, and so a big thank you for that. When we started the conference, in our first session, Martin McKee was saying that the real problem we have at the moment is we don't have political leaders, we have political followers who are following public opinion. And it strikes me from what you've said that there are huge political challenges in two dimensions. One is there's a macro challenge, which is too politically terrifying to tackle, which is who gets what. So what's available to people and what do people have to pay for? And the other end of that is that there's a micro level challenge, which is about how do you get a hearing aid that someone with arthritis can use. So it's operating in those two dimensions. And I guess my question is, what can we as a constituency do to try to bolster up, foster and support or get some political leadership, both nationally and in the European Union?
Yeah, I think it's an observation. It's not unique to me or to me and you, but it's certainly true that in Europe there's been a lack of political leadership, and I think that's true in the Commission. I think it's true in the Council to a considerable extent. And it's partly that nobody wants to do anything like rock the boat. And the Commission has become very oversensitive, shall I put it that way, as kindly as I can, to the larger, or perhaps the largest, member states. And if they are doubtful about a policy, that policy doesn't progress. Now that's ridiculous, because there are some quite good commissions that have been in this last Parliament and one before, but they're frightened of their own shadows in terms of giving leadership. I think if you look at DG Health, I've got some respect for Antonia Borsch, who's just giving up, as I had for Andrew Vassiliou when she was doing that job, and before that with David Byrne. But they've all come up against this the College of Commissioners who will just sit on anything that looks new, anything that looks experimental, anything that you want to go and say, well, let's try it. And so it doesn't happen. Or it doesn't happen without a lot of pressure. And I think of the energy, if you like, but the hours, the days, the months that I had to put in to persuade the Commissioner to do something on patient mobility, not just me, but I mean the group of us, could see what was coming down the line from the Court of Justice, and knew that if we did nothing, we'd go on having policy determined by lawyers and not by elected politicians who were supposed to be elected to do that. So that But eventually, the Commission came on side on that, and then it took a lot longer to persuade all the members of the Council. These are the sort of problems that we have all the time. You look at some of the processes we went through, not in the health field, but on the environment side, the chemicals policy, cosmetics, and the issues of anti-testing. It went on for decades, and before we eventually got some sort of compromise solution going through. So it is a very slow process, and nobody wants to be shot at by nationally, I think it's. I think yes. I think the. I think it's not been helped by the period of economic difficulties. Nobody wants to be seen to be challenging the accepted mantra of austerity, and the whole semester process was started by the managing of indebtedness and trying to get that under control. So there was just to stand up and say we need to do this. It's not going to work. On the other hand, it opened the door to opportunity for the intelligence minister, spokesman, commissioner, or whatever, to make the case for the sort of case we've been talking about in terms of the link between good health and economic potential. And I think that is the macro side. When it comes to the micro side, then I think a lot is actually possible by public pressure, because it's difficult sometimes to persuade to have a big policy change or to have a big spend, however important that might be, without a lot of putting into the right places within governments and so on. The small ones, which the decisions may be taken locally, local priorities, then I would say that if 6 people wrote to me as a constituency member in Parliament about an issue, and I sent my 6 letters individually up to the Minister, and the Minister had 60 members all writing 6 letters coming in. And the Minister was aware that every few months the Prime Minister looked at the correspondence summaries from all the departments, and if he spotted an issue coming up which wasn't apparently being sorted, he'd want to know why. And then you could get a bit of leeway to go down the line and say, sort this one out, and let's accept those needed.
Well, John, thank you very much for this thought-provoking contribution and speech. My question dovetails with the previous one. You gave many examples of the complexity of healthcare and public health and the interplay of different sectors in order to achieve an outcome. And it's interesting, if you look at different countries, South Australia, for example, had a prime minister who really saw that, and he kind of forced the cabinet to act on that. In Austria, some years ago, we had a constitutional amendment that kind of introduced performance budgeting with some element of forcing sectors to work together. But absent of these kind of lucky strikes, how do we assure that there is someone in the leadership position above the sectoral fray who has these priorities in mind and does understand that, in order to achieve health gain and to go after some of the low-hanging fruits, these gains might not lie necessarily within the health sector, but rather a collaboration of the health sector with other sectors. But in the absence of that leadership, both at the European level and at the domestic and the country level, we just keep in our own sector, we operate in our own domains because we know we have a mandate. How do we foster that leadership? How can we instill more of these, both the knowledge, the courage, but also the coherence that makes us truly fostering health in all policies
on adolescent mental health. And there you needed to have the input from health, social services and education. And in every case, one was taking the lead and the other was sort of coming along, but not giving any money to it. One had to take the lead and provide the budget. And so it wasn't very happy, it wasn't working very often. And one of the reasons for that was the law we had, still have to some extent, on ultra-vires. And you're not allowed to spend your money on a subject that's not technically your responsibility. This, of course, was doing that. The added complication was that health was a national responsibility and line management. Social services were a local one run by counties and local government. And education, likewise, a bit more independence. So there were different funding routes and the laws. What happened in the event was that, I think it was in Yorkshire, we got some experiments going where they did come together and they did provide a bit to the budget from all three, or at least two of the three. And the heavens didn't fall in. And once that was established as a precedent, then one was able to put this into some sort of formula which enabled that to be rolled out more widely. To be honest, I don't know whether the law was subsequently changed on ultra-vires. Probably not, but it's probably an allowable exception to it. But it's that sort of thing, I think. Get someone to push the boat out, as we would say, and politicians then have to defend them. So it mustn't be stranded. And that's the temptation. You say, you try it, and if it goes wrong, I'll blame you. That's not good enough.
Thank you very much for stimulating presentation, and that makes our brain cells work even harder. I'm intrigued by your comment when you said that in politics, you have the short-term agendas, so from one election to the next. And this is something that hurts many countries. Rather, the parties in government want to be re-electable. Now, taking it from the perspective of healthcare, rightly so, you mentioned that we should have the moral courage, rather the politicians should have the moral courage to look more long-term rather than short-term. My question is, directed at you as a politician, both at the national stage and on the European stage, what are the tricks of the trade that can make us, stakeholders in the health sector, convince politicians to take that moral courage to move into the long-term agenda rather than the more vote-catching, popular, electable, short agenda?
Well, if I may say so, you have an example in Malta of exactly how it can be done. Someone that I know quite well and respect enormously is Mrs. Gonzi. And Lawrence Gonzi, for those who don't know, was Prime Minister of Malta. And his wife had grown up in a family where her brothers had mental health problems. And she was quite a quiet woman. She's not naturally flamboyant and articulate, but she had a very effective, quiet articulating of her experience growing up in that family, which had an enormous impact. I think it certainly in Malta and way beyond. Only perhaps exceeded by the Prime Minister of Norway, who himself had mental health problems and told his country that he'd got them, said he was going away for treatment, went away, had treatment, came back and won an election. So that was perhaps the best of all, to show that you can come out with something like that and hope that the public will support you. But I think that way, it certainly, I think, put mental health on the map in Malta in a way that I hadn't seen it before. And working more recently with John Kakia, the director, and Dolores Gauchi's and so on.
You're very well.
I know then obviously that's very often the way to achieve it. If you can't, then go to the second route, which is to get them to feel that a subject is theirs by getting them to listen and to come and listen to the people affected. I know well myself, that and particularly if it was in my constituency, if I was shown a health issue and I was shown what the possible solution would be, then that became my issue. Those were my people. I wanted to find a solution to it, and so get that going up the line. If you can do it with someone who happens to be a minister as well, that's even more effective. But I think there are ways, and it is very often done by the personality of the politician. And I'm going to say using them. I don't mind being used, but some people would resent that term. But the other thing I would say to you is, if you get somebody on board doing something, do something which perhaps we don't do often enough. Afterwards, say thank you. It's a reward that politicians don't get very often, and when they do, they notice. And I've met it. And I say to my staff when people have gone, what nice people. If they come again, yes, of course I'll see notice. If you get the megaphone politics at you, it's the opposite. Tell people to, you're busy next time.
Great, thanks. Any further comments, questions? Well, I think maybe then we have to conclude this session. And, well, Jan, again, this courage amongst politicians and courage amongst all who work with the sector is obviously something. And when it comes to politicians, I mean, it is after all the populations, the voters who have the responsibility to vote right and then support their politicians properly. So I mean, if we now have the great opportunity to live in democratic societies, we should of course use that possibility as much as possible. So I mean, that is probably the most strong weapon we have to bring things forward. So thank you again for all your aspects. And as a little tribute to this, from EHMA, a solar charger, but I thought that, I mean, if you connect yourself to this, I support that the flow of energy will go not from that to you, but the other way around.